When Pokémon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl were announced on the 26th of February 2021, many compared the game's art style to the diorama-inspired graphic design of the Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening remake on Nintendo Switch. This comparison only became more interesting 2 minutes later when Pokémon Legends Arceus was announced and was quickly compared to the Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. This unsurprisingly led to posts across social media comparing the two franchises in how their latest releases are a top-down 3D remake of a classic and a brand new open world take on the franchise. As games, The Legend of Zelda and Pokémon are very different, but I believe the similarities being pointed out here are very deliberate on Game Freak's part. A large and loud portion of the online Pokémon fanbase has been very critical of Pokémon games on social media in recent years. Really, ever since Black and White, there has been some level of controversy with each game. Black and White were controversial for featuring only new Pokémon, before the post-game anyway. X and Y for simply being 3D, being much easier, featuring the new EXP share, and later for lacking in post-game content. Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire for various changes to the originals, easing of difficulty, and of course the lack of a battle frontier. Sun and Moon for severe hand-holding, and regularly being stopped for dialogue and cutscenes that weren't always necessary. And of course, Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee for being Kanto remakes again, lacking the Sevi Islands from the last Kanto remakes, and of course for their Pokemon Go style catching mechanics. As it happens, many of those controversies over time became positives for those games, though not all of them. But the most recent controversy was by and large the most prominent. Pokemon Sword and Shield were controversial for their poorly textured graphics when compared to other games on Nintendo Switch, with most users focusing on a single tree as the most egregious example, and more so for the omission of the National Pokédex. While the National Dex was technically also cut in Pokemon Sun and Moon, the game still supported every single Pokemon if they were traded in. However, in Sword and Shield, the game only supported a certain number of Pokemon. More were added via DLC, but at the time of this video's release, there are still over 230 Pokemon completely unavailable in Sword and Shield. Despite the controversy, Sword and Shield still sold over 20 million copies, making them the best-selling Pokemon game since Gold and Silver in 1999, as of the release of this video. In an interview with Games Master magazine in 2016, Junichi Masuda said, "We do always listen to our fans and their hopes and what they have to say about the game because it's really important. But if we just take their ideas and put them into the game, then that's not going to be very surprising for players, because they'll have already thought of those ideas. What we really try to do is listen to those ideas, but then take that and think, how can we use this to surprise players? How can we give them something new that they perhaps haven't thought of?" So, despite the strong sales for Sword and Shield, Game Freak and Nintendo certainly would have noticed the fan outcry regarding the issues with their previous titles. In February 2020, it was reported that Game Freak would be moving its headquarters to Kanda Nishikiko in Tokyo. Apologies if I completely butchered that pronunciation. At the same time, Nintendo announced that it was consolidating its 4 separate Tokyo offices all into one office, also in Kanda Nishikiko. At the time, it was unsure if this was coincidental, but in November 2020, Game Freak moved into the same office building as Nintendo EPD Tokyo, Nintendo PTD Tokyo, HAL Laboratory, and 1UP Studio. Game Freak and HAL Laboratory do remain independent studios, besides Nintendo's 32% ownership of the Pokemon IP, that is. However, Game Freak sharing a building with a Nintendo studio, the one that developed Super Mario Odyssey, no less, could be telling of a strengthened relationship between Nintendo and Game Freak, and it would be undoubtedly easier to share resources across companies that are located within the same building. Now, back to Zelda. This combination of smaller games, or remakes, and bigger, newer games occupying the same generation of consoles is not new to the franchise by any means. As far back as 1998, Link's Awakening DX launched on the Game Boy Color alongside Ocarina of Time on the Nintendo 64. A Link to the Past plus Four Swords launched on Game Boy Advance in 2002, 2003 depending on the region, alongside Wind Waker on GameCube. Continuing on, Nintendo would launch smaller top-down classic-style Zelda games on handheld consoles, while launching newer, more modern Zelda titles on home consoles. Later, with the 3DS, a series of remakes and remasters began with Ocarina of Time 3D, which launched the same year as Skyward Sword. However, when the Nintendo Switch launched, consolidating Nintendo's handheld and home console businesses, Zelda fans wondered what this meant for the handheld, classic-style Zelda games. But with the launch of the Link's Awakening remake, it's quite clear that Nintendo intend on continuing the tradition of releasing classic, top-down Zelda games while also creating more modern 3D titles, only now they reside on the same console. I believe that the Pokémon Company and Nintendo are trying to replicate this successful formula with Pokémon. Pokémon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl are the first mainline Pokémon games to be developed by a company other than Game Freak, and I believe this is possibly the most significant piece of Pokémon news we've had so far in 2021. Pokémon has had its own tradition of remakes now, with Fire Red and Leaf Green, Heart Gold and Soul Silver, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, and now Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, and Let's Go if you want to count those. But I believe developers besides Game Freak will, over time, be allowed to handle mainline Pokémon games besides remakes. Sort of like how Capcom and Flagship developed The Legend of Zelda Oracle of Ages and Seasons, and later the Minish Cap. I believe developers such as Ilka Inc. will continue to develop classic-style Pokémon games, featuring 8 gyms and a Pokémon League, while Game Freak will mostly focus on newer, more experimental Pokémon titles like Pokémon Legends Arceus. And in fact, looking back at the quote from Junichi Masuda from earlier in this video, what we really try to do is listen to those ideas, then take that and think, how can we use this to surprise players? How can we give them something new that they perhaps haven't thought of? If that doesn't sum up Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, I don't know what does. We were all expecting Sinnoh remakes, and they obliged and they made them. We certainly weren't expecting them to be like this, and we certainly weren't expecting a prequel set in the Sinnoh region with an open world and all of this. And if you look at the graphics of Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, while many may not be a fan, this is arguably a truer evolution of the 2D Pokémon graphic style than what we got in Pokémon X and Y. It's like if you took Diamond and Pearl and made them 3D. You kept the perspective the same, you kept the character sizes the same. I'm not necessarily saying that you have to like that, but I think to an extent you've got to understand where the Pokémon Company was coming from with this decision. I think having other developers continue these classic style Pokémon games, with Game Freak making newer, more experimental titles, would provide us with the best of both worlds. The classic formula we've grown to love, alongside true change and potential innovation, alongside a renewed focus on story and lore. Not to mention, this would allow Game Freak to spend more time on each title, with the classic games providing Pokémon releases between longer development times on Game Freak titles, and would allow Game Freak to flex their creative muscles, something they've complained about in the past, explaining that developers get Pokémon burnout, which previously led to smaller projects like Tembo the Badass Elephant and Little Town Hero. Overall, that's why I think this was a deliberate, meticulous decision to take the Zelda formula of game releases that's been working for so many years and apply that to the Pokémon franchise to not only give us more games, but also more different and experimental games without having us lose the formula that we've come to know and love over the last 25 years. Also, just a quick footnote at the end, Nintendo literally did this with Metroid as well. When they were releasing Metroid Prime, experimenting with that series as a first-person shooter, they released Metroid Fusion on literally the same day as a classic Metroid game, so this is very clearly Nintendo's proven, safe way of experimenting with their franchises. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments below, and for more Pokemon content, subscribe to the channel and follow me on Twitter @TrainerCallumYT.